So, I want to start this piece about radical simplicity with a story, and some of you may have heard this, but I think it tends to fit. Anybody here ever teach? Anybody here ever been taught? Anybody ever been around little children, 5, 6, 7 years old? Okay. Well, the story goes like this. It was the beginning of the school year, and this teacher had first grade, and the principal, who never taught. Did you have a principal who never taught school? Okay, yeah, so you can imagine. The principal says everybody has to go to the assembly. This is the third day of school. And the teacher sends a child down with a note to say, I don't think the first graders are ready to go. And of course, you know, the note came back and said, the first graders will go to the assembly. So it was a police officer doing a safety demonstration. And about 10 minutes into the demonstration, everybody in the room knew that probably only the 8th grade students should be there. It was way over everybody else's head. Well, you know how when you went to church or you went to an assembly like that, the row right next to Sister was for the very special little children of God? Okay. Well, this little guy, Tommy, migrated. The teacher was back here, sitting on the aisle, and back there, and he ended up in the front row, right on the end. Well, about 15 minutes into the assembly, Tommy starts to have his own assembly. And every time he did something, he would sit down and turn around and look at the teacher, and the teacher would go like this. And from the front row, Tommy would go like this. About a half hour into the assembly, Tommy is now walking across the front row, talking to all of his friends, you know? And he would sit down and turn around and look at the teacher. The teacher would go like this, and from the front row, he would go like that. About 45 minutes into the assembly, Tommy is now standing up on his chair, looking at all the older children in the school, trying to find his older brothers and sisters and waving to everybody. He would sit down, and the teacher would go like this, and he would go like this. Finally, the assembly is over. The principal dismisses the children. Tommy goes back to the classroom with the first graders. The teacher gets a hold of him, and she says to him very gently but sternly, Thomas, do you not know that when I go like this, it means I want you to come here to me right that minute? And in all innocence, this little child of God says, yes, ma'am. And do you not know that when I go like this, it means I don't want to? It's a great story. Great story. And I say it because while there are some Thomases literally among us, I think there's also a little Thomasina in each of us. That in any moment along the way, perhaps already this morning, you have had a little Thomas or Thomasina come up in you and say, I don't want to. I don't want to hear this. I don't want to think about this. Go away. What does this mean? It's scary, whatever it might be. And I use it at this moment in our conversation because I can guarantee you that some of the radical simplicity will have you having Thomasina come and visit you, and possibly Thomas come and visit you. And I say it simply for this reason. This radical simplicity is going to be the death of us yet. Because, as we said a little bit this morning, those of us in this part of the world, especially, and those of us in religious life in particular, live a very first world lifestyle, no matter where we live. And it's first world simply because of our education. That's what makes it first world. Catholic sisters are the most educated group of women on the planet, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And we're very grateful for our education, aren't we? Just incredibly grateful. At the same time, there's an unintended consequence that it has created in our consciousness that gets translated into privilege and entitlement. And so somehow, privilege and entitlement smack right up against radical simplicity. So already, even in me, I can feel Thomasina saying, I don't want to. I don't want to be called to radical simplicity, because it will turn my life as I know it upside down. Okay? So a couple of things then about radical simplicity as a way of life. Now, I'm not suggesting that that picture is the picture of any of your rooms. And if it is, I'm not going to ask you to identify yourself. I'm also not suggesting that these two pictures are pictures of any of your spaces. The one on the left is a lot of, canned goods and all this, very organized. It looks very different than that. Okay? And the one on the right is actually a computer screen with icons galore. Interpret everything in the most favorable sense. No one's making any judgments here. Okay? We're simply trying to lay out the reality that at this moment in time, many of us, even those of us who try to live a carefully simplified kind of life, it is a challenge. It is a challenge. And if it looks like that, that's pretty evident that there is some real challenge here. If it looks like this, it could be a little tricky, because it's neat and it's organized, but it is not simple. Hoarding. What I want to share with you, this is for my sisters in the room, what I want to share with you is that hoarding is the emerging addiction among Catholic sisters all over the world. After alcohol and drugs, the next one is hoarding. If it hasn't come to your country yet, be on the lookout for it. It's coming. It is a natural consequence of having access to everything we need. What the World Bank has discovered is that people who have access to everything they need, basic needs, shelter, healthcare, education, food, and all of that. People who have access, like us, first world lifestyle people, who have all of our basic needs met. The tendency is to want more. People who do not have what they need, people who live without water and food and shelter and education and healthcare, their tendency is to share freely what they have. It's an interesting paradox. Okay? Point. Hoarding is both a noun and a verb. As a noun, it's a large board that's put up in public space. It's a temporary fence around a building site, to hoard something, to kind of quarter it off and just have it be whatever it is inside. It's also a verb. It means to store up and put aside, stow away, reserve in your mind, amass, accumulate, gather. What I'm suggesting for us is that beyond the physical elements of what does it mean to hoard and hold on to, there's another whole dimension for us to look at in terms of the way we hoard our thoughts, the way we hold on to our attitudes, the way, as Margaret was saying yesterday, we're still mad at Sister Mary Sue because she looked at us crooked 27 years ago in the corridor. That's hoarding. It's hoarding. It is holding on to and clinging to whatever it might be, so that we basically put a wall around ourselves and then try to live in that self-contained space. For those of us in religious life right now, as we go through this historical, evolutionary, transformational time, the temptation to hoard what was is huge. To hold on to what was is very, very tempting. Whether it's the way we think about what was, or whether it's the way we think about what we think it should be. Point. The third highest illness for Catholic sisters around the world is hoarding. And the most serious evidence of it is when you've got a lot of stuff in your room. It's an illness. It's an addiction. I'm talking about the spiritual and emotional and cognitive and psychological and perspective kind of hoarding. That we hold on to what we know and we keep pulling more into it, but it's all what we know. And we keep gathering it because for some reason it makes us safe, makes us feel safe. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So, the 3 talking points, in case you want to take a nap, the 3 things you want to make sure that you hold on to this paper for, in case Monica asks you, what did she say, is to understand the times in which we live, and then to actually use the graces that are being given to us in this time. And finally, to feel the urging of the challenges. And do all of that without A, losing our mind, or losing our sense of joy, or losing our way. So what might help us with this radical simplicity? Well, I think the one thing is to recognize the natural rhythm of life. We said this a little bit this morning. Everything that lives does what? Dies. My nephew would say, get over yourself, Aunt Carol. What are you so concerned about? Everything that is alive is going to come to an end. It's a natural rhythm of life. When we overlay that with the Paschal mystery, we have an even deeper understanding that everything that lives dies, so it can in fact live again. So when I hear, not you, but when I hear congregations just like weeping copiously because they have to sell their mother house, or they have to leave their last ministry, it's as if you're lining all the sisters up and you're pulling their fingernails out at the cuticle with no anesthesia. And then they say, it's always been here. No, it hasn't. No, it hasn't. So the one thing I'm offering is to understand the times in which we live so we can be radically simple, that we can really have what we need and no more than that, is to first of all recognize the natural rhythm of life. Secondly, I would offer that we need to realize the need that we have to let go. To let go. To not cling. And you're probably not doing this, but I'll tell you, you're very unusual if you're not. Why? Because somehow in the human spirit we do not like the unknown. We still think there's a boogeyman under the bed in the dark. We do not like unknown. We'd rather make something up, even if it's not true, just so we could be certain of something. So I think one of the insights for us is to realize that we are living at a time in the space between the death certificate and the birth certificate. We need to let go. Even if we pick it up again, whatever it is that we're letting go of, we need to let it go so we can pick it up in a new way. Either that or we need to let it go. And thirdly there, we need to be about restoring the capacity to be free from whatever it is we're being held back by, in order to be free for. For example, I'll tell you an example that comes to my mind as I think about that. This whole topic about elected leadership. I don't know where you are in your conversation, but I'm working with a lot of congregations that are sitting in rooms like this and they're saying, you know what? Not really sure we have another team for our next chapter. Or I'm not really sure we have another team for 2 chapters out. Actually, canon law suggests that at our next chapter, whenever that is, we should be having a conversation about 2 chapters out from then. And if you are not 80% sure that you have a pool of leaders for 2 chapters from your very next chapter, you need to start having a conversation about what will you do. Point. This freedom from worrying about whether we have elected leaders and just making sure that we pull them out of the closet if we need them. Because we have to have elected leaders. As long as they can breathe and talk and walk and sometimes make sense, then it's good enough. We need to be freed from this consciousness that says just because sisters are younger does not automatically equal to the fact that they will be in elected leadership. Leadership is not about how young or old you are. In the same way, this time is not about how many or how many not you have in your congregation. So there's a lot of things that we need to have some conversation about, that we are holding on to, mindsets, attitudes, perspectives, that if we keep holding on to them, we will not be free from them so that we can be free for whatever the invitation is next. Does that make sense? You know, I've had some younger sisters in the United States, sisters under 50 years of age, say to me, is not elected leadership a discernment? And I said, yes, it absolutely is. And then they say this, we feel that we're not going to get an opportunity to discern. We're being told by the sisters at the Mother House, we're glad you're here because you're going to be in leadership for us for the next 15 or 20 years. So, we're safe for a while. Again, I don't know your conversation, but I would imagine some of that is around the edges because it's everywhere. It's everywhere. I would have more conversation about capacity for a congregation. What do you mean by elected leadership? But I mentioned it here because the way we think about leadership, the way we think about membership, the way we think about numbers, the way we think about caring for our senior sisters, all of that, we have to hold it lightly because we have to find a new way to do all of it. If we're still doing it the way we did it, we are hoarding. And when you hoard, you are not free. Make sense? Okay. Now, I'm not going to ask you to do any of this, don't worry. Okay? But, you know, sometimes you cling for your life, you know, which is, you know, sort of okay. Anybody that would do that on the left, I think has to be out of their mind. You know? But, you know, certainly we cling. There's a need for some of that to be safe and to be secure and so forth. And I think this is where we need to do the clinging. We need to hold on to where we are in this moment. We need to hold on to Christ crucified and risen. So we said some of this morning, that the times in which we live are just filled everywhere. Everywhere you look, there's evolution going on. Historically, look what's happening to governments, to economies. Look what's happening to cultures all over the world. They're either being decimated for whatever reason, or they're being lifted up again in a whole new way. There is something happening that is evolutionary. It's evolutionary. There's ecclesial evolution. There isn't a faith tradition on the planet that's not going through a huge institutional collapse. Doesn't matter whether it's one of the, you know, Abrahamic traditions of Judaism, Christianity, or Islam, or one of the multiple God religions, Buddhism, Hinduism, Confucianism, Taoism, you name it. Whatever the religious traditions are on the planet, they are all going through an institutional, structural collapse. Why? Because we are living at the time that we're living. Religious life, evolution. We said a little bit about that this morning. We'll say more as we go on. But there is an evolution going on in religious life. I think I shared with you that in my community, at one point there were 2,700 of us in my community. Never any provinces, one general council, and 2,700 members. That was maybe about 40 years ago. And I think I told you that behind me, you know how you do in rank, behind me, there are fewer than 50 sisters. We have 710 sisters in my community right now. 710. And of those 710, we have 11 who are under the age of 55. Yeah, I'm going to say that again because sound travels slowly. We have about over 700 sisters in my community right now. And of those 710, we have 11 sisters who are younger than 55. We have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sisters between the ages of 65 and 95, which is the norm for religious life right now on the planet. Most of the Catholic sisters, there's 1 million of us in the world, you do know that. Of the 1 million of us in the world, the majority of women religious, certainly in the northern western countries, are between the ages of 65 and 95. Point. We are in a religious life evolution. Do you think all those communities had the poorest vocation directors they could possibly find? This is not about not having good vocation directors. There's something else going on. Personal evolution. It's part of what Margaret was inviting us to yesterday. What are you noticing that's happening in you personally? And then a communal evolution. What shift is happening in you as a community as you sit here these days? That's all the stuff that we need to pay attention to. And if we're hoarding what was, we're not going to have any room to pay attention to it. A couple more things. What are the graces of these times that could invite us to what you refer to in your documents as a radical simplicity? A capacity to live so focused on what we're supposed to be focused on that it is in fact radical. Well, I think one of the graces is this understanding that there's no such thing as global and local, as if they are two opposites. In fact, the word that the international community uses, that's not a misspelling, by the way. No. The word that's used is glocal. Everything is glocal. There's no such thing as, on a local level, conflicts are happening between, ethnic groups. That's only happening because at a global level, conflicts are happening on the planet between and among ethnic groups. And those conflicts are happening at the global level because at the local level, the conflicts are happening between ethnic groups. And if you don't think there are conflicts happening, you try and have a wedding in your family. And try and have, as I did several years ago, my niece had to try to figure out where is she going to seat Uncle Harry at the reception. Because wherever she seats him, there's going to be a war at the table. Point. We all get that at the global level, there are wars and famines and all of that. They only exist because the wars and the famines are happening right around our tables. That's the grace of this moment, is to not think that they are two separate entities. They are one and the same elements of the same dynamic. That's a hard one to get our heads around sometimes. Oh, personal and communal. There's really no such thing as personal and communal as separate entities. There is only the common good. We're going to say a whole lot more about the common good. But for now, just let me say that whenever the common good is talked about, here's what it usually looks like, at least what I see when I'm with groups like yourselves. This table, all the tables are talking about the common good, for example. And everybody's talking with each other, and this is what I see. And then I usually see this. And the words that go with that are, yes, we're all saying the common good is really important. We have to make sacrifices in order for the common good to be sustained. And you ought to think about moving from where you live for the sake of the common good. It never comes this way. I never see this. I never see somebody at a table say, it's always, we're going to say a whole lot more about that. But the grace, I think, is to understand that the difference between the personal and the communal is a false dichotomy. There is only the common good. Within the communal is the personal. We take care of the whole thing. That's how each of us gets taken care of. We don't take care of each one of us, adding us all up, and then that will take care of the whole thing. That's not the way that works. You take care of the largest whole, and then everything that's part of that large entity is cared for. A very different way of thinking. And the next three come right from Pope Francis again, from Joy of the Gospel, where he said that if you want to know the menu for Jesus' life, and I'm suggesting if we want to know a menu of, you and me and even Margaret, we'll let the Ursulines in on this too. If we want to know how to live this simplicity in a culture that is anything but simple, and in a lifestyle where you and I have everything we need, what Francis says to us is that our choice every single time is between inclusion and exclusion. It's between mercy or love and fear, and it's between mercy and judgment. And what he lays out for us is that when we understand, as Jesus did, that inclusion every single time over exclusion is actually what creates salvation. When we understand that love over fear every single time is what actually creates redemption. And when we understand finally that mercy over judgment every single time, that that's what it means to be a human. To be able to choose every single time love over fear, inclusion over exclusion, and mercy over judgment. So what are some of the continuing graces? I'd like to offer just 3 of them. There's a book out by Thomas Friedman. I don't know if you know that name. He's a writer for the New York Times. And the name of the book is called Thank You for Being Late. I love that title. Thank you for being late. And it comes from his experience of waiting for someone that he was going to interview. He's a journalist. And the person was late. They were caught on the train or something in Washington, D.C. And what Thomas says about himself is that as he was sitting there at the cafe, he realized that he was actually thinking. And he said, no, I think all the time. But I think about what I'm going to write next. I think about what I'm going to read next. I think about what I'm going to do next. He said, I realized I was thinking about thinking. And when the person showed up, the person said, I'm so sorry for being late. And Thomas said, no, thank you for being late. That's where the title of that came from. But what he writes about 3 elements, 3 dynamics going on in the world right now. His sense is, from talking to other professionals, of course, is that these 3 are going to be with us for the next century. So hold on to your hat. Okay? The 3 of them are globalization, by which he means the movement of peoples, technology, and climate change. They are the 3 realities that will be with the human population for the next century. Globalization, technology, and climate change. So I want to just say something briefly about these because I think these are graces for us. You know, when we talk about globalization or the movement of peoples, it's usually a negative kind of experience that we have. But when you think about a globe, it's actually a sphere. The planet, you know, is not a circle. It's a sphere. It's interesting when you understand about a sphere. A sphere has everything that's on the surface. You know, when you think about the planet, for instance, all of us live on the surface of the planet, right? Okay? And everything on the surface is connected because we're all on the same ground, if you will. And then the second thing about a sphere is that everything on the surface is equidistant from the center. Wouldn't that be wonderful if everybody in this room could be equidistant from the heart of the mission and the charism? Wouldn't that be great if that's how we could be connected? It would be fabulous. Secondly, technology. Technology is wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And it's going faster than any of us ever imagined. But it also creates some challenges. These things are good. I don't know what we would do without computers. Do you? Or without iPhones. You know, somebody said to me the other day, what did we do before we had iPhones when we were getting picked up at airports and all? I said, we waited. You know? I waited in the Philippines one time for 7 hours. You know, it was before cell phones. I just waited. I knew the sisters would come and get me at some point. You know, I just waited. But we can't imagine our lives without these things. However, some of the graces in those technological inventions, I think, are around relationships. They're around intimacy. Usually when we hear the word intimacy, we think of sexual intimacy. Intimacy actually is broken down into 3 words. Into, me, see. See into me. Into me, see. If you don't know the way your local community, or if you don't know the way that kids in your family or your grandkids, you know, you don't know the way your sisters you're living with like their coffee or their tea, or if they even like it or not. If you don't know if your grandkids really love captain, whatever they are, the action heroes. If we don't know that about each other, if we can't see into each other at that level, forget it for any other level that's deeper. So some of the graces in the technology moment right now is really a grace of intimacy. How do we use that technology and still have relationships that are solid and grounded? Virtual reality, I work with quite a few millennials, and they live online. They live virtually. You know what they're looking for? This is in their words. They're looking for a locus. They're looking for a place to be with their feet, a locus, and they're looking for identity and integrity. So they love the virtual world. That's how they live. But they're noticing there is something that can't happen virtually that has to happen. I think it's a grace, and certainly the whole need for respect. And finally, climate change. Now, of course, climate change is the environmental issue. But one of the things that Thomas Friedman talks about in his book is that climate change is way more than that. Again, the only reason we've got climate change as an issue is because of all the climates that have been changed between and among people. So one of the questions he asks is, have you ever noticed, people's faces? That's what that upper left-hand corner picture is, Have you ever been in a situation with this bottom left-hand corner? That's a climate. How about this bottom right-hand corner? Metaphorically, of course. I don't think any of you have antlers, but maybe you do. Okay. The question in terms of climate change for us, as we're trying to get closer to this radical simplicity, is to really understand the significance of presence, of really being where you are. Have you ever met somebody and when you're talking to them, you have the sense that they are not behind their eyes? Have you ever had that experience? Yeah. Okay. Being behind your eyes is what presence is all about. Being really where you are and being there. As if there was no other place or no other person or no other conversation that you'd be wanting to have at that very moment. That kind of presence. The toxicity that is in relationships. And again, there's toxicity in the natural world, but it's only out there in the natural world because it's in the human community. The animal species does not have toxicity in relationships. It's only the human community that is toxic. The impact of words and actions. Have you ever walked in a room and you know in the snap of a finger how you're going to be received? Yeah. That's how you can measure your own climate. The other grace, I think, is knowing the importance of climate. We all just don't show up here like yesterday. What Margaret invited us to do was just a moment of grace. Tell us your name, because who you are matters. Tell us some of your story, what has shaped you, because how you come to this room matters. That's a grace. And a lot of people don't do that when they gather for a meeting, They just come in and say, here's the agenda, now we're going to talk about this. So how do we continue to pay attention to the importance of climate? And then finally, one of the graces, I think, is a need for critical analysis and adjustment. We need to really be critically thoughtful. And critical here doesn't mean negative. Critical means mature. Critical means to be able to hold something, whatever the thought is, and not judge it. Not right away say, bad, good, positive, negative. Critical analysis, critical theory is a very mature set of theory. It means you suspend judgment and you just take it as it appears before you and do some analysis and reflection and so forth. Very challenging. So, the challenges. Love over fear every single time. And it's a choice. It's a choice. Now, the psychologist world tells us that human beings only do things based out of love or fear. So if you want to know the motivation of somebody, they're only motivated by love or fear. That's the only thing that motivates people. human beings, love or fear, mercy over judgment, and inclusion over exclusion. So a couple final little thoughts here. So we're talking about the challenges of choosing love over fear, choosing including over excluding, choosing mercy over judgment. You know, the greatest thing that you'll ever learn is to love and be loved in return. I know it sounds kind of hokey, but it's true. And see, here's the thing. If we can't do that in this room, and if Margaret can't do it in her Ursuline family, and if I can't do it in my Joseph family, then there's probably no point for us to even exist. Because we are supposed to be the presence of Jesus Christ walking around on this planet. So if we can't do it with each other, there's no chance we're going to be able to do it beyond us. Sometimes, probably not for you, but sometimes with some sisters and our associates and our ministers, we do a better job in our ministry than we do with one another. Love is when the other person's happiness is more important than your own. Sounds great to put up on a bulletin board, doesn't it? But when that other person standing in front of me is angry or upset or hurt or depressed or frustrated, it is really hard for me to say, okay, what's important here is that other person's happiness and not mine. And I love that picture of that rose, you know, for you. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could live like that with each other? That, you know, I will be the best I can be today, I promise, like a rose for you. That's what this life is about. It is for others. A couple things about fear and judgment. I like this last one up here, and as I said, you'll have this PowerPoint if you wish. But this last one here I think is really key. It says, loss of control is always the source of fear. It is also, however, always the source of courage. Our fear kicks in when we feel like we have no control over what's going to happen next. That's what makes fear, when we lose control. And already what I've said to you this morning, I think, you know that the control we have over religious life right now is zero. God is taking us on a ride, and we just have to go with her. We are not driving, she is. No control, except how we're going to choose to be on the ride. That's what we have control over. So just some pictures of fear and courage. When you judge another, you don't define them, you define yourself. Isn't that a great saying? When you judge someone else, you don't make a decision about them. You make a decision about yourself. And then this one is what I meant earlier about the comment. When you point a finger, I love this one. When you point a finger at someone else, you've got 3 other fingers pointing back at you. Okay? Which is an indication that you have to look at yourself at least 3 times before you judge somebody else. Inclusion, exclusion, it goes on everywhere, you know that. And because it goes on everywhere, it means it goes on here too. It has to. There has to be an inclusion and exclusion challenge in this room. Because there's an inclusion and exclusion challenge in the larger world. So, radical simplicity has to do with getting rid of the hoarding. Whatever it is that we are holding on to and clinging to and surrounding ourselves with, so that we don't get afraid. And we get afraid because we don't have control over what's going to happen next or next week or next chapter or whatever it might be. So it brings us back to the same set of questions. So what have you heard as you listened? What touched your heart? Did you notice anything happening in you? To what does this invite you? Personally and as a community? And what questions might you have?